Thank you so much to our presenters for some fascinating presentations, and also to our audience for some equally amazing questions that are coming through quick and fast. I'll address the ones that I think there's some current themes, but please keep them coming and we'll see how we go. So the first one, really open to the panel, but perhaps starting with you, Fraser, would be, there's quite a lot of questions about post-construction and how do we monitor the effectiveness of the designs that we've done post-construction, so 2, 5, 10 years after the design is finished.
Yeah, so with Macallan, we're just at the point of sort of implementing the habitat enhancements, so we can't sort of monitor them yet. But what tends to happen on larger infrastructure schemes is that there's a monitoring program of key mitigation that's been put in, whether it's badger underpasses, bat boxes, that sort of thing. And actually, under the EIA regulations 2017, that sort of monitoring of mitigation that's been specified in an EIA has sort of become mandatory now. So I think as ecologists, we need to get a lot more evidence base about mitigation that we've put in. But I think that's going to happen with what's happening through the EIA regs, and more of that happening from now on.
That's great. Thanks, Fraser. And perhaps, Matt, this one might be most directly to you. How do you engage the communities and educate them on the interrelation between cities and the associated ecosystems?
Well, on the Christmas Island project, we had a stakeholder engagement team that we went out there and we met with members of the community, parks, rangers, people that manage the infrastructure adjacent to the slope. So from that perspective, I think it's really important to lean on the recommendations of other specialists that can plan how best to engage with the community, and then you can draw on their expertise as well, like some of the crab migration routes and the issues of crabs getting in amongst people's houses and buildings. We just wouldn't have known about that unless we had those conversations.
That's great, thanks, Matt. I guess open to all of you, but perhaps Donica, you might be able to answer this one initially. How do you make this type of nature-based solution applicable on more city or urban type environments, and therefore really create ecosystem-rich systems within the cities?
I think there is a general trend and a push, and it's been given extra impetus in the past couple of months through our sort of the new way of things going to work around our city planning and the greening of our cities. So I think it's nature-based solutions in our cities are being considered through sort of a COVID recovery, and how we go about our cities are designed. There's you can see in Northern Ireland, and it's happening throughout the world, that there are the consideration of nature within cities. It has come to the fore. So I think within our city planning, at a strategic level, it's at the first stage, and that's where the decisions need to be made. The development, the use of techniques such as sustainable urban design and sensitive managements for pollinators are examples of techniques that can be used within the city. So I think we're at an exciting time where hopefully these types of nature-based solutions are being sort of considered much more for our cities. Yeah.
Natasha, Fraser here. Just coming there, for people listening in, they should check out Arup Cities Alive, Reimagining Green Infrastructure, and the series of work that was done there. And that gives a really good sense of overview of what we should be doing in cities and the sort of work that Arup's involved in. And then there's a fantastic scheme in London called Wild West End, where we were trying to sort of connect areas of green space within central London with street trees, green walls, green roofs, sort of pollinate. So that's a really good example that people should and could check out.
Thanks, Fraser. I was thinking of exactly the same project, so that's great. I had a really interesting question. Perhaps, Rory, you might be able to initially answer this one. Is that the value of biodiversity is not currently included in the GDP, and it's not generally included in business case or decision-making processes. How do we make that happen? Do we need legislative changes to drive it into the business case?
It's a great question, and indeed very complex, in the sense that within the corporate sector, there's forerunners. So there's companies that are driving this forward, and the organisations such as Business for Nature, Act for Nature, are corralling these organisations, best practice and so on. And as I said, there's a willingness to do it. We see more recently with BP in terms of their net gain approach, etc. So there's companies stepping up to the plate. However, there's always forerunners, and I think it's there's probably a legislative requirement for the SMEs. It's a little bit more reluctant to pick up and take on the mantle. I mean, the narrative is here. You know, there's the knowledge and the tools are here. There's always this aspect as regards as well. We don't have confirmed targets for biodiversity, but that's being developed as we speak. Science-based targets for the corporate sector. Yes, we don't have an apex target for climate, but they are coming, and there's an acknowledgement actually. We can't wait for these as well. We do need to progress and develop the targets concurrently. As regards sort of wider concept in terms of society and so on, well, that's more difficult, and it's, I think, you know, without taking up airtime, but it's really a lot to do with education. It's about internalizing our understanding of nature. There's a lot more of a deeper sort of conversation there around that. But that's sort of my tuppence worth, as it were.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rory. I guess there's been quite a lot of discussion about biodiversity net gain in this panel discussion. So a big question is biodiversity net gain in the property development schemes really going to make a dramatic difference to our biodiversity values and condition? If anyone wants to jump in, or I'll pick on someone.
That's Natasha.
Yes.
I think yes, it's coherence. It's what has to underpin net gain is coherence in terms of where these interventions, where the additional habitat is allocated. So for a long time, there's been an aspect of holding a line in terms of environmental degradation, particularly within the sphere of ecology and development control. So for the first time, it potentially is a great tool, but there needs to be coherence, and we certainly don't want it to go the way of net loss in terms of a failure to adapt and sort of almost, I wouldn't say abuse of the system, but the manipulation of units and credits and so on. But coherence, and in the UK that supposedly is happening via the nature recovery networks, which will be underpinned by net gain.
Fantastic.
Natasha, I guess on that as well, you know, it's mandatory on every sort of project in England and Wales now, and I know Joe De Silva's got this mantra of, well, that means there should be a biodiversity specialist involved in every project, and I think that's what we've got to aspire to do, to really get to the heart of some of these projects and get our hands dirty and be in there from the start where we can make the biggest successes.
Thanks, Fraser. And we've just got time for one last question, which I'm going to ask each four of you to answer, which is really, what is the one thing that non-ecologists or non-biodiversity experts, whether they're an owner, a developer, contractor, client or engineer, what can they do differently or approach differently to improve the biodiversity outcome of a project? So I'll start with you, Matt.
I really think that there's, like Fraser just said, then having a biodiversity specialist involved in all projects would be fantastic, because the gains, there's a lot of focus on threatened species and I guess ecologists telling developers what they can't do. We're often seen as a constraint. Even this piece of gain in the middle of an urban environment or a city still contributes to some element of getting a good biodiversity outcome. So I guess have an open mind and think of the benefits that we're able to bring to it.
That's great. Donica?
I would be a parrot for that, but that's along the lines of exactly what I would say. It's embedding the consideration of ecology at the earliest stages of any development, and getting specialists involved at the very earliest stages to identify, the opportunities, as opposed to just where ecology would in the past have been seen as, let's not break any legislative requirements around impacting on a protected habitat or species. There is the hopefully we can get to a place where we're finding opportunities to enhance and make those gains, and being involved at an early stage is what's needed to find those opportunities. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Donica. I'll just pass it to Fraser.
Yeah, I just really encourage, whether it's clients, contractors, or sort of the public, just to be really interested and engaged, and I think that's happening more and more. I think clients are seeing the value of it. The contractor that we worked with on Macallan was phenomenal. As an ecologist for a consultancy, you don't always trust contractors, but they were just really engaged and sort of really forward thinking. And then, working on a highways scheme in Aberdeenshire at the minute, where the public have been phenomenally engaged and passed on a huge amount of useful information that's really helped shape the scheme in some ways. So, I think that this is just happening naturally, but I think there's a real engagement with biodiversity at the minute, and I really hope that continues.
Fantastic. Thanks, Fraser. And last but not least, Rory.
Thanks, Natasha. What I suppose I'd encourage developers is that, more often than not, it's a short-term view in terms of the development and the next one. And there's this aspect of custodians as regards the interventions, their enhancement for biodiversity, and moving away from like a structurally embedded short-termism, if you like. These are long-term problems, and we need sort of long-term solutions. So thinking just beyond the immediacy.
That's great. Thank you all. And I'm so sorry we've run out of time, because there's been some amazing questions come through. But if you have put your email address, we'll be able to address them separately and respond to your questions. And if you've got any further questions, there is an email address on the page, biodiversity@arup.com. So please feel free to reach out and we'll be able to answer your specific questions.